Good morning. I'm Darrell West, Vice President of Governance Studies and Director of our Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institution. And I'd like to welcome you to our Mobile Economy Summit. This event looks at mobile technology as a change agent across the world. It builds on several past forums that we have held this year and examines how the rapid expansion of mobile technology around the world is transforming economic opportunity for millions of people. We are webcasting this event live, so I'd like to welcome our viewers from around the country and around the world. We will be live tweeting the event as well. We've set up a Twitter hashtag at TechCTI, that's TechCTI, so any of you who wish to pose comments or ask questions can feel free to do so. And during the Q&A segment, we'll try and take questions both from our live as well as virtual audience. Mobile technology has revolutionized the means by which we communicate with one another. It has dramatically altered areas such as finance, entrepreneurship, education, healthcare, and politics. We have put out several papers showing the changes taking place around the world. Those papers are free and available online at brookings.edu. And those of you who are here in our auditorium, there also are copies out on the table outside the auditorium. Today, we have a half-day conference that looks at several aspects of mobile technology. Our 9 o'clock panel will analyze the intersection of economic development and mobile technology. Our 10 a.m. panel will explore the impact of mobile on politics, elections, and democracy around the world. The 11 o'clock session will look at the universal impact of mobile technology on several different policy areas. And I'd like to thank Qualcomm for its generous support of this summit as well as the broader mobile economy project that we have been undertaking. This is part of a 3-year effort on our part. Brookings has set up a website on the mobile economy project at brookings.edu. So if you're interested either in the past papers we've done, you can check it out online. We have transcripts of the past events and some video from the past events that we've done on that website as well. For our opening session, we have an outstanding set of speakers who will focus on economic development. Sean Covell just flew in from London to join us, so thank you very much for that. She is the Vice President of Government Affairs for Qualcomm Incorporated. She manages global operations and strategic planning for the Government Affairs team. Previously, she was based in Hong Kong and served as Senior Director for the company's Southeast Asia unit. In that role, she worked with ministries of communication and independent regulators on national frequency allocation plans, 3G regulation, and 3G licensing, among other types of issues. Prior to joining Qualcomm, she was a manager of congressional affairs at the Cellular, Telecommunications, and Internet Association, better known as CTIA, the largest U.S. wireless industry association. Sonal Shah is a senior fellow at the Case Foundation and a fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University. In her position with the Case Foundation, she works closely with Foundation CEO Gene Case and is overseeing a study and a cross-sector advisory group on impact investing. Prior to that, she served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of the first White House Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. There she focused on investing in and scaling innovative models, leveraging technology, and opening up information surrounding the social sector. She also has worked at Google, where she led the company's global development initiatives on philanthropy. Lawrence Chandy is a fellow in the Global Economy and Development Program here at Brookings. His research focuses on global poverty, fragile states, and the effectiveness of foreign aid programs. Lawrence has worked in a variety of developing countries as a consultant and advisor. From 2005 to 2007, he served as a senior economist in the Department of National Planning in Papua New Guinea, where he contributed to efforts to strengthen the government's public investment management program. Prior to that, he served as a consultant at Adam Smith International, where he led the delivery of donor and government-funded projects in the developing world. So I'm going to start with Sean. You work with many governments and organizations to implement programs that create opportunities for those living in poverty. How is mobile affecting economic development around the world?
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate the kind introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Qualcomm, we're passionate about creating inventive wireless technologies and solutions. And we're passionate about it because fundamentally we believe that wireless has the power to positively impact people's lives. There are over 6 billion mobile connections now in the world, which really makes mobile the largest technology platform in the history of humankind. Now, a lot of people talk about mobile being an enabler, and it is that, but I think it's a lot more. It's really a multiplier, and at its heart, it's a game changer. As Daryl mentioned, I just got back from London. I had the opportunity to attend something called the Mobile for Good Summit, and that really brought home to me how wireless is bringing together NGOs, governments, the private sector, educators, and how mobile is really a horizontal technology cutting across all of these verticals. I mean, whether it's education, entrepreneurship, healthcare, the environment, you name a sector, and mobile really is not just enabling it, it's transforming it. And there's a couple of areas that I'm particularly passionate about. One is the ability of mobile to create entrepreneurs, and especially to empower women around the world. The GSMA recently did a study where they found that over 41% of female entrepreneurs in developing countries were able to increase their incomes by using their mobile devices. And this is significant because there's another IMF report that tells us that by 2014, 50% of global GDP will be coming from these developing countries where these female entrepreneurs are. And a little bit later in the panel, I'll get into more detail about a project that Qualcomm has with the Grameen Foundation, where we're seeing the very positive evidence of putting mobile technology into the hands of entrepreneurs, and particularly female entrepreneurs. Another area where I think mobile has just been a game changer and will continue to be is healthcare. You have countries from the United States to China that are dealing with two very significant healthcare issues. One, aging populations, and two, the rise of chronic diseases. And these two issues are already having a negative economic impact on countries' GDPs, but if countries aren't able to effectively address these issues, it's just going to get worse for them. And we can take China as an example of this. There's a Chinese research institution that has noted that from 2005 to 2015, China stands to lose $558 billion in national income due to heart disease, stroke, and diabetes alone. Chronic diseases have now, cardiovascular diseases have become one of the leading causes of death in China, accounting for nearly 3 million deaths annually. In addition, there's also a World Bank study that shows that if China could just reduce the mortality rates from cardiovascular diseases by 1%, that would result in a net economic positive impact of 68% of China's 2010 actual GDP over the next 30 years. And what does that equate to? That equates to $10.7 trillion. So you can see the severity of this issue on economic development. And that's where I think mobile is really going to play a huge role, because the other issue these countries are dealing with is there are simply not enough doctors to reach these patients. In China, for example, 80% of the doctors are in the urban areas. They're not accessible to the rural patients. You're hearing more about frontline healthcare workers. and you put a mobile device in the hands of a frontline healthcare worker, well, now they're able to monitor patients' diseases. They're able to train patients to monitor their own diseases. They can take that information, transmit it back over the 3G networks, where doctors sitting in the hospitals in the cities can now monitor patients, advise them, diagnose them. And so the mobile device is allowing the doctors to exponentially increase the amount of patients that they can take care of, thus reducing the death rates and the negative economic impact. So those are a few of the issues that I'm excited to talk to you all about, and thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much. Sonal, you've worked in a variety of capacities with different organizations on ways to achieve impact on economic development. So what role do you see technology playing in this, and what are the things that are having the greatest impact?
Thank you, and I think Sean did a nice job of kind of setting up the mobile piece of this. And I think what what's been interesting about what technology has been doing, and I think in many ways what mobile is doing, is it's breaking down big institutions into figuring out how small things can work. So in many ways, we've tried to fix the large institutional structures, and what is needed is almost a cross-cutting issue, which is how do we help communities solve their problems? What do they need in solving that problem? And necessarily fixing the big institution hasn't been the only way to do it. There's lots of ways of thinking about it. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, and mobile is one of those ways in which it's cutting across institutional structures, whether it's through money or whether it's through healthcare or whether it's through education and water. There's lots of problems. But I would start with, I think, the problem is what's the information that people are looking for, especially in poor communities. And we tend to start with what's the solution that we need to provide them versus what's the information that they need. And I'd like to give a couple of examples. So water is a great example, and I'll give you one in India. In southern India, they were finding that a lot of families, and a lot of women especially, were waiting around to figure out when the water spigots were going to be turned on. So when's the water coming? Is it coming at 6 a.m.? Is it coming at 8 a.m.? Is it coming at 10 a.m.? Lots of people just wait around until they can get the water because it's important to fill up the water containers that they have. And the people in government didn't actually know when exactly it was going to turn on. But a young woman who actually went to India to work on a project to help provide clean water found out that the problem wasn't the first problem to solve wasn't the clean water problem. The first problem to solve was just the water problem. And she worked with the government workers to figure out when it was that the spigots were going to be open on a regular basis, so they would at least have an hour earlier before the spigots opened. They knew what was going to happen. She created an application that allowed families to get access on their mobile phones as to when the water was going to turn on, so they could be near their homes at that time, but they didn't have to wait around for it. Now, this is a pay-for application, so families are paying for this service that tells them when the water is turning on. It's not a water solution. It's not a mobile solution. It happens to be an information problem that mobile is the solution for. And this company, I think, will eventually become for-profit in the next year or so as more subscribers come online and as they start to get more information from the government on a regular basis. But I'd start with saying, one, it was an information problem. First, figuring out what information government has that can be provided, and then two, it was an application problem, which is how do you get that information to those communities on a more regular basis so they can actually do something about it. The second example, which is a smaller healthcare example, is one in South Africa, which has now been brought to the US. And here it's called Text for Baby. But in South Africa, they were using a texting service on HIV/AIDS. So when somebody needed to get their medication, when they needed to be eating, they used texting to let people know when they should be doing this at every time of the day. Because what they found first, what the problem was, is people didn't know what they should be doing. And then they figured out that texting was, because everybody has a mobile phone, texting was a way to actually think about getting that information to them. And by getting that, they were able to improve the efficacy of the use of the AIDS medication, because if you don't take it on a regular basis, the cocktail changes. Similarly, that same technology has been brought to the United States. 2 years ago, they launched a program here called Text for Baby. Low-income communities, especially low-income mothers in the United States, 90% of them use mobile technology. Very small percentage actually use a computer. Now, if you're trying to get to these communities, then mobile is probably the place to think about it. But thinking about what they needed, low-income families have low birth weight babies. So can you get information as to what a mother needs to do on a regular basis during the pregnancy? Johnson & Johnson, in partnership with a couple of nonprofits, and the government has worked out a program that allows people to text in, text for baby and text for bebe in Spanish, and mothers during their pregnancy, during their 9-month pregnancy, will get information on their mobile phone every day as to what they should be doing at this stage in their pregnancy. It's not a medical solution, it's just information that they can then use, and then they still need to go to the doctor. There's still lots of things, but they help in addressing that, and there's a research study going on as a part of that to see what the effect of that is over the next 5 years. But what's important here, I think, is it's what's the problem, and then what's the solution, and what's the technology that can help with that. I think sometimes in development we try to solve the technology problem first, and then we figure out that it wasn't the problem that we were solving for. It's an information problem that needs a technology, not a technology problem that needs information.
Thank you. Lawrence, you study the role of mobile technology in spurring financial inclusion in global development. So how is mobile money affecting the financial revolution around the world?
Well, let me start by saying that I'm a big enthusiast for mobile money, and I hope that in my short remarks I can convince some of you as well. For the uninitiated, mobile money allows anyone with a mobile phone to store money, to transfer money, and to receive money without requiring a bank account with a formal institution. And the mechanics of that are fairly simple. Rather than going to an ATM to deposit money or to withdraw it, you go to a designated agent. Those agents in the most successful offerings are really ubiquitous, and they are mobile themselves. So they may be the people who stand on the corner of the crossroads selling airtime, dry cleaners, petrol stations, supermarkets, you name it. And the process of actually transferring the money from one account to another occurs through a simple text message. The pioneer in this, in providing this service, really is Safaricom, the Kenyan mobile phone operator, who developed this product called M-Pesa, which was launched in 2007, and just achieved tremendous, really unprecedented success. Within 3 years, they'd captured 50% of adults in Kenya were using their service. And in a country where 2/3 of people live below $2 a day, it gives you an idea that it gives you a clear sense that they're able to serve people with low incomes. And that ability to serve people with, at the low income end of the market is what's so significant, because that's where the formal banking sector has really failed. The two constraints to access to finance in the past has been about distance and about cost. And the distance constraint is overcome with mobile money, because rather than needing access to a bank, all you need is reception on your mobile phone and access to one of these mobile agents. When I say mobile agents, I mean they move a lot. And the cost constraint is relieved simply because the technology drives down transaction costs so much that it's possible to provide mobile money services with very low fees for transferring, and to allow individuals to carry out very small size transactions. The success of M-Pesa has, and others, I know I'm talking a lot about Kenya, but the success of M-Pesa has really inspired many other mobile phone operators to try and replicate that kind of success elsewhere. And today there are 140 mobile money offerings around the world, and there are another 104 in the pipeline. And it's this takeoff of mobile money which means that today there is an expectation that potentially within 10 years, the 2.5 billion people in the world who don't have access to financial services could have access. And so for me, there are three big implications of all this. And this is where I start to get quite enthusiastic and evangelical. So the first one is that mobile money, it seems to me, can really transform what it means to be poor, and can provide a stepping stone to help people escape poverty. So it's always been a defining characteristic for the poor for years to not be able to access financial services. As I've said, through mobile money, it should be possible to provide those services to poor people. But also it allows those people, encourages them to save. It allows them to borrow money from their friends and family when they experience shocks, such as poor health or say a bad harvest. And that allows them to smooth their consumption. So it really prevents people who are what we call the vulnerable poor, people who tend to yo-yo in and out of poverty, to be able to stay out of poverty. The second point is that mobile money will encourage, I believe, much greater quality and variety of goods and services for low-income customers. And you're really seeing that in Kenya. There are around, I think there are now over 500 companies in Kenya who are selling goods and services which can be paid for with a mobile phone. And and given that it's in Kenya, lots of them are targeting the low-income market. And so that just dramatically changes the nature of the access and availability to markets for low-income customers who are used to operating in formal markets where as I say, the choice and quality of goods and services is very poor. My third point, and this is me speaking as someone who works on foreign aid, is that I believe that mobile money will really transform the way that outside parties, whether it's international donors, charities, and governments in developing countries themselves, try to help the poor in the developing world. The traditional model of foreign aid has been to try and guess who the poor are and guess what they might want. So you might build a well in a place where you have the feeling there are a lot of poor people. With mobile money, there is the potential to have much greater confidence in who the poor are by using mobile phone records and other information, and combining mobile phone records from mobile phones with other information such as biometric identification records. And more importantly, you can transfer money to those people rather than just provide them with things you think they want. And that allows poor people to decide to use that money for whatever they need themselves. And this is a real game changer. There's something we call the helicopter test in the foreign aid business, where we say that you should only attempt a project or an intervention if you're fairly confident that it will have a more positive impact than if you threw money out of a helicopter above a poor country. And what mobile money has the potential to do is really to raise the bar and say, well, is this intervention going to be more effective than pinging money with almost zero transaction costs to an individual who we know has very low income, and putting that money right in their pocket so they can use it for what they need. So for that reason, I think as I say, I'm a bit of a mobile money enthusiast. There are certainly challenges to enabling greater access, and we might get to that later. But I hope I've convinced some of you.
Thank you. I like that helicopter test. I think that's a good standard. Maybe we should suggest that for the U.S. Congress as well. But, Sean, you were mentioning your interest in female entrepreneurs in particular, and I know you've done some work in that area. First of all, what challenges do female entrepreneurs face, and how can mobile technology help them gain access to capital or other types of business opportunities?
Well, I can tell you about a project that Qualcomm has worked with the Grameen Foundation in Indonesia over the last 6 years. And I think what's great about this project is it has some nice ties to what both Sonal and Lawrence have been discussing. So initially, our partnership with the Grameen Foundation was to partner to bring something called the Village Phone Program to Indonesia. And I don't know, for those of you who may not be familiar with this was born out of Muhammad Yunus's work in Bangladesh with microfinance. Something called the Village Phone came out of this, where you go into a community and a person would take a small microfinance loan, use that loan to buy a phone kit. It would have a mobile phone, signage, business cards, perhaps a booster antenna, bring it back to their village and retail the airtime minutes to other villagers. And that was something that Grameen called a win-win-win-win. You'd get a mobile operator who was getting more minutes of use out of that mobile phone because the whole village was using it. The microfinance agency would get a good repaying loan customer. The village was getting increased teledensity. And then, of course, the entrepreneur, once they paid back their loan, would have their own small business that was quite sustainable. But herein was a great example of what Sonal is talking about perhaps not always knowing what the issue that you're trying to solve. So we went into Indonesia with this program, having done the research. We did a year's worth of research and found that, if we went with this operator and this microfinance institution, we should be able to roll this out. Well, after throwing a lot of money out of a helicopter, we found after a year that the project actually was not working. And the reason was because the mobile teledensity was increasing a lot faster than we predicted. Therefore, the people in the villages trying to sell the airtime weren't making enough money because too many people had phones. So we had to put our heads back together and rethink. And actually out of this came something dramatically better when we actually solved the problem that was needed to be solved. And we ended up creating a social enterprise called Ruma. And what Ruma does is it enables various products and services for these entrepreneurs in the villages to sell on top of the airtime minutes. So for example, the first thing they did is they started to aggregate wholesale minutes from all of the mobile operators. And the entrepreneurs in the village could not only sell the minutes on their own phone for people to use, but people could come up to them with their mobile phone and say, hey, I need you to top me up on Indosat or top me up on Bakri. And so the entrepreneur could, over the air, get a code, give it to the person, and they could top up their minutes. So this was one example. They came up with many other innovative applications. One was called a day job search. And this, the villagers could sign up with the entrepreneur and be put on a list that would alert them of work, either in their village or nearby villages, that would be applicable to them, so thereby increasing employment. And so just by virtue of finding the right solution, the project has been now wildly successful. We have 15,000 of these, we call them mobile micro-franchisees, working in villages, and they touch about 1.5 million unique customers, so quite an impact. And some of the stats, for example, 82% of them are women, 100% of them are profitable. 47% of them, if they stay working, in the portfolio for over 4 months, are able to raise themselves above the World Bank's definition of the poverty line of making $2.50 a day or more. So, I mean, really having a dramatic impact, putting mobile phones with the right applications in the hands of women in various countries, in this case Indonesia.
So Sonal, you have worked in 3 sectors, the public sector, the private sector, and now you're in the nonprofit world. What are the biggest barriers that you see to innovation, and what are the policy or operational changes that we should be considering?
So that's a day-long seminar in itself, probably. I'll just kind of, I think there is an interesting opportunity, and I think the example that Sean gave that illustrates what the issue is, which is it's really thinking now what the problem is we're trying to solve and thinking about who all needs to be at the table. It might be a mobile company, it might be an app developer, it might be an engineer, it might be a government at the table. I think we all tend to come at it that it's our problem to solve. So government is looking at it from, okay, how do I solve for my problem? And the companies are looking at it from their perspectives of what they need to do, which is open up offices in whatever country they're in or get more customers. But if you really think about it, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Then who all needs to be at the table and designing the solution to that problem, which is I think what you all did with Grameen in Indonesia. But it needs to happen more often and more rapidly. Instead of trying to solve the problem from the outside, doing it on the ground and allowing, and I think this is what innovation does, is it allows for rapid development. Once you do a rapid prototype, figure out if it's working, if it's not working, how it needs to adapt, and then redo it again and allow it to happen on a regular basis. From a development perspective, we tend to want to solve the problem at the top, and then we want to go in and implement it, and if it doesn't work, it was a failure. Well, the failure wasn't in the process. The failure was in the process, not in the product necessarily. And what Google and everybody else does is they're constantly changing the product as they're getting feedback in, whether it's Facebook or Google. As they get feedback, they're constantly adding and making changes to it. And that, I think, is one way in a process of innovation that we might think about how we look at technology differently from the way we might. So bringing the right groups of people together, doing rapid development. And the last piece I would say is from a policy perspective, a government perspective, government might want to just think about its role slightly differently, which is, can you be a platform of information? So government has always seen itself as a solution provider, but what if we were a platform? And what if we were to provide information? We collect a lot of information from a lot of sectors. And what if we were made to make that information more publicly available and then allowed people to figure out what they need out of it? So in the US, when Todd Park at HHS started to make health data more publicly available, they ran a competition for companies to use this data in whatever way they wanted to, and they found that 10 new companies got started out of the process of making public data more publicly available. Sometimes it was real estate companies, sometimes it was healthcare companies, sometimes it was different groups of people using this information differently. But I don't know that we know what the solutions are. I think what we know is that government as a platform is a great place to say, what can we provide and make open that others can use with it, rather than trying to create the technology. Making clear policy is actually one way of getting there, but I think also we can think of ourselves not just as on the regulatory side or on the creation side, but really thinking about, can we be a platform to think about this in a slightly different way?
Okay. Lawrence, you mentioned Kenya as a success story in terms of mobile money, but obviously we can think of a lot of other countries where that has not taken place. So why is mobile money spreading faster in some places than others?
There have been a lot of studies attempted to answer that question, and they all have slightly different answers, and the answers tend to be quite complicated, which suggests that we don't actually know the answer yet. I recently read a study by the IFC which identified 50 characteristics which could tell you whether a mobile money offering would be a success or not, and that's quite a large number. I can't believe they're all important, but perhaps they are. You're certainly right that there's been some great successes in some countries and some real disappointments elsewhere. And in some ways that seems contrary to what our theory tells us about the challenge of bringing innovative solutions to scale, which is that it's meant to be really hard to do it the first time. But once you've sussed it out, there's a demonstration effect. Other people can borrow, can learn from your successes and failures and replicate much more quickly. And that theory or model isn't really borne out in the mobile money market, which presents an interesting conundrum. So what I will say is I think there are three factors which to me seem particularly important in determining success or failure, and hopefully I can, as I describe these, I can name some other countries. So the first is that there was a killer application which made M-Pesa successful in Kenya, which is that they marketed the product as allowing people to send money home. And this was in a country where there was great demand for domestic remittances, people who work in the cities sending money back to their families, say in the highlands. Now that need isn't present in every country, and this gets back to Sonal's point about what is it that what's the problem the poor people face, rather than what is the solution I have a solution, let me try and throw it at various things and see what sticks. So in other countries, the killer application might be something different. And for example, just to go to an industrialized country example, mobile money has been very successful in Japan, where it's been used to allow people to travel by public transport in Tokyo using near-field communication technology. And that's been a tremendous success. And there was a real demand for that there. So finding that killer application means understanding the market. And I think that, for example, one of the reasons why in Tanzania mobile money has been a great success is because there's a similar need for this, there's similar demand for domestic remittances as there is in Kenya. You wouldn't find the same thing in a country like Gambia, which is very small. A second factor which I think is very important is regulation. So in Kenya, you saw that regulations followed innovation rather than getting in the way of it. And regulation is so important in this sector, in all these innovative sectors, because usually regulation is based on old technologies. So the regulations that exist in most countries are for the telecommunications sector and for the banking sector. There isn't ready-made regulations to cover mobile money. And that creates a regulatory void, and you need supportive regulation to allow these products to take off. In a country like South Africa, regulation has been, where Safaricom tried to roll out the exact same product, they faced a much less supportive regulatory environment. And so this is going to continue to be an issue as we see mobile money being used for other services, more complex financial services such as international remittances, where regulation can be very cumbersome, and in allowing mobile money offerings to allow users to earn interest from their account, which at the moment they can't do because mobile operators are not banks. And the third factor I'd say is that when we've seen success and differentiating success and failure is about patience. So I think that the culture of mobile, I don't know the mobile industry well enough perhaps to say this, but my understanding is that the culture of the mobile industry is it's a very contestable market where the successful operators can be quite ruthless and they try different products and they very quickly determine whether they're success or failure, and if they're not working, they ditch them. And in mobile money, you can't make that judgment that quickly because there's a need to gain the trust of the customer. After all, you're taking their money. That often it requires a behavioral change on the part of the customer. You need to educate the customer. So as with any new product, you can't, preparing the market takes time. And I believe that one of the factors which has really distinguished success and failure is that some mobile phone operators have really struggled to switch from that culture which has served them so well in getting customers for mobile phones, for that kind of greater patience required to succeed in mobile money. And there's a nice example of that in Tanzania, where initially Safaricom really wasn't working well before they brought in a manager who'd had some experience with a different mobile phone company. And so understood the need for that patience. So there's at least three factors which I think are really important in distinguishing successful and less successful offerings.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Can I just add to that for a second?
Sure, go ahead, and then we'll open the floor to questions.
Because I think that it's actually pretty important that in some cases, especially when it comes to poor communities, some things might be market innovators, but they may not be the one that succeed. It might be people that build upon that because they've learned what happened in the market. And I think the failure of applications or the failure of ideas may not be the problem. May be a good reason to allow more of that to happen because you learn from it. And it happens in industry all the time, but I think sometimes in development we're afraid of failures because, well, if that application didn't work, we should never use it again. That application may not have worked because it was a policy problem or it was a something else problem, but it might actually open the door to have a conversation in some of these countries. And I would urge that we think about the ability to have failure as a way of saying there might be people that open the door to things, but it requires a patience to recognize that creating a market will require some failures in the process of it.
That is a good point to remember. Let's take some questions from the audience. You can just raise your hand, give us your name, your organization, and we'd ask you to keep your questions brief just so we can get to as many people as possible. And don't everybody speak at once because, you know, that's really rude. There we go. And we have a microphone coming over to you.
Oh, it's going to be short. So. Hi, I'm Jim Rain, just a private individual. You mentioned this perhaps in the second factor when you mentioned regulation as one of the barriers. I was wondering if there are examples where mobile innovation has sort of led access to justice, sort of court systems or some dispute resolution sort of thing.
Maybe the next panel.
I'll just take that as a more of a transparency governance question, because I think what's happening in a lot of the developing countries is people are beginning to use mobile to get information about where corruption is, how much bribes are, making that information more publicly available and using that as a way at very local community levels. You're beginning to see this around the world. And one of the places where it's actually rapidly developing is in India, especially around when campaigns start of where the corruption is, what are your officials doing, where are they taking bribes. That's becoming more of an application that people are beginning to develop. But I'd say it's still in the early stages, especially in a developing country context. I've not seen it in the judicial context per se, but I think what's been a problem there, and I think what a lot of people are trying to do, is what's the information that needs to be made more public? And it's not yet an application as much as how can we put the laws online so people have access to the information and they know what they're up against. And in a lot of countries, that's beginning to happen more regularly.
And if I can just add to what she said, last week we actually did a conference in Prague on ways to fight corruption. And so her example about using mobile technology and websites as a way to promote transparency. There are sites where people who are basically being hit up for bribes can go to this website and identify the person, the date, and the amount of the bribe that was requested. Now, this doesn't eliminate bribery, but it means you don't get overcharged. You know what the going rate is in your neighborhood. So there's some virtues at different levels of the problem. Right here, we have a question. This young lady.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is Sunaina, and I lead innovation and change management for a global bank, a for-profit bank. My question is, I actually spent some time last year in Asia working with the Grameen Foundation and got to see, you know, the pragmatic solutions in terms of your mobile money and the work that they're doing with microfinance. And my question is, there seems to be a ubiquitous need for those solutions within our own environment in North America and in the US. You know, we've got several underserved communities when it comes to, you know, financial services or even trying to get funding where they just don't have access to capital. Any thoughts on what we ought to be doing at home, and if there are people who are doing this kind of stuff in our own environment?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with you that the need is global, and that global need includes the United States. You know, I do think that there are various microfinance institutions, some of whom are working in the United States. I don't know, do you have specific examples? I don't have specific examples, but I know one organization that, and I'm forgetting their name, but they've actually set up a website that matches donors with people who need microfinance loans. And I believe that it's international plus the United States. So that's one example where there's an organization trying to pair people.
Kiva or Global Giving?
It might be Kiva, yeah.
And they're beginning to do it domestically, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to add to that is I think it's this is probably a place where the regulatory problem is a bigger problem because what you see in M-Pesa and what you see is that the regulatory system didn't know how to deal with mobile money, so it kind of happened. And I think what you happen here is that the regulatory system is constantly monitoring. I know there were a couple of sites in 2008, 2009 that went out where people could individually loan to other people, and a lot of those sites are being monitored more because from a regulatory perspective since the banking crisis. So it kind of went down to a very local level and not just at the macro level. So it's a question, I think, on a regulatory level that we probably need to look at and say, you know, what is it that's getting in the way of making some of that happen? And I think that's not a question yet that's been addressed because we were busy addressing the larger regulatory issues, that everything in between got caught up in it, and even innovative models got stamped out because of that reason. What's been interesting on the other side is people looking for money on projects. This whole crowdsourcing funding platforms are becoming bigger. Mm-hmm. So you could get on different crowdsourcing funding projects. If you have a project, no one gets a tax credit for it. People are just, you know, funding these projects because they want to and they can. And that's actually an interesting model to watch, I think. But the other pieces on the lending side, it's been partially a regulatory issue.
Yeah, and Daryl, if I may just add to that, Sonal makes a great point, which I think that you also see in the healthcare industry. You know, the US and other more developed countries tend to be heavily regulated. And, you know, that's with good reason. We have less accidental deaths, et cetera. But it does stifle the invention. And I think there's a common belief that really we're going to see the new applications and services and things come out of the developing world and come back to the developed world because they're more able to test things out. And
well, they're able to leapfrog where we're almost hindered by our own infrastructure, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, in the very back there was a question. Gentleman with his hand up. Yep.
Hi, my name is Cliff Kellogg from the U.S. Treasury, and I was interested in Sonal's comment about using governments as platforms for information, because I think there is so much potential in that, and yet we are, as a government, quite sensitive to sharing of personal information. In fact, we're precluded from sharing certain personally identifiable information. There's also a question of government endorsement of particular initiatives. In fact, people may view the government sharing information about a private initiative as a stamp of approval, when really what we want to do is just get information out there. So I think we have some real challenges to think through, and I wonder if the panel has any ideas on how we could do that.
Lawrence, you want to jump in?
So, I mean, one thing I would say, and this is really just echoing your point, is that the data produced from the mobile industry is just so rich, and we haven't really begun to tap it to see what we can find within it, and what it can tell us, and how it can improve how it can improve sort of interventions which are attempted, and our ability to particularly, I think, help low-income customers. So, what I just wanted to tell you a couple of examples of how mobile phone companies are using that rich data to provide new services. So, for example, in Brazil, there's been a recent attempt to look at people's mobile phone records, just how much. So, for example, take my wife. She uses her mobile phone a lot, and she always pays her bills. Now, that makes her a great. That suggests that she's the kind of person who would be a great candidate for credit. She'd probably be a very keen customer, and she'd probably pay her bills. And that's exactly what they've done in Brazil. They've looked at just a month of records and been able to determine people's credit scores. And and similarly with insurance premiums, they're able to look at people's records and determine their eligibility for insurance. So this data is very, very rich. If it's going to be shared more broadly, which I think would create much bigger benefits than just limiting it to the mobile phone company itself, there's a need to first make the data anonymous, and that should be possible, but it requires coordination and effective regulation. And I think that we have very little idea of just what that data can enable us to do. I mean, the great thing with mobile phones is that all this information is stored. No one's deleted anything yet. No one's deleted all the old files. So there's such a large amount of data. And like I said, with that example from Brazil, it was 1 month of data they were able to do that. They were able to determine people's credit eligibility. So, so harnessing that data, getting access to it, I think is really key. I agree.
Over here, we have a question. There's a microphone coming over to you.
Vijay Kumar, I'm small business, and using India again as an example where mobile technology could be used, is that they've established to cut down corruption. They have 2 programs ongoing programs. One is our national identification program to identify everybody, and the other one is transferring money directly to the people so that they can cut down middle layers where there's a lot of corruption. Is more technology being pursued, or something that could be done in that area?
So I think this is where things get really exciting, because we have these different technologies, communication technologies, identification ones, transactions, and it's putting them together where you start to create really interesting things. And my understanding in India is that they haven't yet planned to provide cash transfers through mobile phones, but clearly that potential exists, and it's being done elsewhere. And I tried to make this point in my remarks, but I don't think I made it very well, which is that the ability to identify the poorest people is made possible through mobile phone data, but it can be really enhanced if you combine mobile phone data with biometric data. And to do a plug for some people I know, another online charity, which is Give Directly, they allow anyone in this room to make a donation which goes directly to someone's mobile phone, mobile money account in Kenya. There is no middleman, and they have they were set up by some very bright economists, maybe some mathematicians. They're able to say with a very high level of confidence that the people receiving that money are extremely poor. And as I say, it's much better than, as I say, that old form of giving aid where you have to sort of guess who's poor and so forth. So, so I think that what you're describing is where there's massive potential, and we just have, and I hope that in the next few years we start to see that biometric technology and this enthusiasm for cash transfers combined with mobile technology to really start to drive results.
Yeah, and I can actually tell you about a project that Qualcomm's Wireless Reach Initiative is working on in India. So in India, there's something called the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme you may be familiar with. And it basically says that employment is guaranteed for a certain amount of days to rural workers. But there's a ton of corruption in actually getting the money from the government to these people after they work, often day laborers. A problem is because they're day laborers, oftentimes their fingerprints have literally been worn off. Something that we can't imagine, but this is what happens. So, you know, this IDing of people is very difficult. Well, we're working with a company called BWO. They're a social enterprise, and they've developed, instead of fingerprint technology, they're using voice recognition technology to confirm the identity of the workers and thereby, you know, guarantee that they actually get the money. Because previously what was happening is, you know, the person from the government would come out to the rural area. Perhaps they wouldn't give out half of the money, but they could just sign the sheet and say they did. But now, you know, they get the voice ID of the person has to confirm that they actually got the money, and thereby reducing corruption. And another point I wanted to make, just, you know, a few questions back just on general policies and things that governments can do to help in all of these areas, is that if you do subscribe to the idea that mobile technology really is going to be a game changer in a lot of these areas, healthcare, financial services, et cetera, we really do need to work on releasing more spectrum. Because the need for data is only going to increase as time goes on. And spectrum is basically the highway through which all of these services travel. So we need to look at that.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So we'll go with this gentleman right here, and then we'll move to our 10 a.m. panel.
Thank you. My name is Akeem Sawyer. I sit on the board of a mobile payments company in Sierra Leone called Splash. The question I have is, what role do you see the current established financial institutions in developing countries playing in the space? And how do you see that evolving as time goes on?
Are you talking about the existing formal banks? Yes. Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is that for some of the more complex financial services, at the moment, the mobile phone operators can't provide them alone. They need to partner with banks. And that's largely due to regulations, but there are other limits as well to the kind of business models we have at the moment. So to go back to, I think, a point I made earlier, which is about the ability to provide mobile money users with interest on their accounts. In most countries, only banks are allowed to provide interest. So that requires mobile phone companies who want to get into saving products to partner with banks. The question then is, do the banks want to get into this space, and do they want to alter the way they've behaved in the past where they haven't really targeted the low-income segment? A great example of how this can be done is in Kenya with Equity Bank and the product M-Kesho. But what's special about Equity Bank is that Equity Bank were already really changing the way they behave to try and serve low-income customers in the first place. They were setting up setting up banks all over the place. They were offering products which are very strongly tailored to poorer customers. So it does require it requires an interest from formal banks to get involved in this space. So I think that we're at a place now where mobile phone companies can offer a lot of financial services, but not all of them are working alone. And it's going to require a willingness from the formal banking sector to get involved. And the way to do that is to convince them there's money to be made. So we're still waiting, I think, for more innovative business models to be developed. But given how quickly they're already some of those are already emerging in areas such as microinsurance, I think it's probably just a matter of time.
Okay. It's clear that there are great opportunities in this area, but we also need proper culture, organizations, and policies in order to facilitate innovation. So I want to thank Sean, Sonal, and Lawrence for their contributions to this discussion. And then I'd also like to invite our next set of panelists. Juliana Grinwald will be moderating the discussion, and she'll be joined by Katie Harback, Rebecca Rosen, and Chris Spence. Thank you.